Hey YouTube, I'm back again with another video, this time for NFL predictions for week 5. Going over my week 4 results, I ended up going 9-7, having the first winning record since week 1, and a overall of 34-28. But before we get into the week 5 predictions, I did want to say this video will be lacking the research that I have been incorporating in my videos for the past few weeks, because I wasn't even sure I was going to be able to get this video out because I got a YouTube ban on my channel, which was a incorrect ban, and I since disputed it and they reversed it. But just to let you guys know, everything should be back to normal starting on next week's predictions. With that being said, let's get into the video. Starting us off on Thursday night, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers taking on the Atlanta Falcons. The Buccaneers coming off an impressive win over the Philadelphia Eagles, in which Baker Mayfield threw for over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns and really just dominated that Philadelphia defense, who actually looked good last week against the Saints. So I really don't know what to think about that team. As for the Falcons, they won a close nail-biter, getting a game-winning field goal over the Saints, in which, honestly, the Saints looked like the better team throughout pretty much most of that game. But when it came down to the time that matters most in the fourth quarter, the Atlanta Falcons were able to pull out the victory. As far as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus the Atlanta Falcons, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers really have only had one bad game, and that was against the Broncos last week. Other than that, they've looked fairly impressive in their wins so far. The only team to have beaten the Commanders at this point. So I really do think I'm going to take the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to beat the Atlanta Falcons. Up next, we got the New York Jets taking on the Minnesota Vikings. The New York Jets looked absolutely terrible in a loss against the Denver Broncos, in which Bo Nix only threw for 60 yards in a win. The Jets offense just couldn't move the ball and couldn't get it in the end zone, and that's just something that is going to be a struggle with the offensive coordinator they have. And sometimes Aaron Rodgers is going to be able to make up for it, and sometimes he's not. This game, he wasn't able to overcome it, and they only put up 9 points offensively. Then we have the Minnesota Vikings, who won a nail-biter at the end against the Green Bay Packers, in which they were leading 28-0 at one point, and the game ended 31-29. Sam Darnold had a good game, throwing for 275 yards and 3 touchdowns, but did give away a couple turnovers late in the game that let the Packers get back into the game. As far as this matchup, if the Jets had beat the Broncos really handedly, I was really considering taking the Jets to upset the Vikings, and maybe this will only increase that chance as the Jets just got punched in their mouth and were able to do nothing about it. So maybe this lights a fire under them like the Bucks losing to the Lions did, and they're able to come back and really dominate in a win over the Vikings. But I'm not going that far on a limb. I'm going to take the Vikings to beat the Jets. Next up, we got the Carolina Panthers taking on the Chicago Bears. Honestly, Andy Dalton looked like he had a fairly good game, and Chuba Hubbard was able to establish a good run game as well. So the Panthers the past couple weeks have honestly looked like a competent team. As far as the Chicago Bears, they wound up beating the Rams, which I honestly didn't think they would, but their defense looked fairly solid, not letting Stafford throw a single touchdown and picking him off once, while Caleb had not a good game, but at least a clean game with no interceptions, while also throwing a touchdown. And that really was the difference in the game, in which it was a one-possession game. So honestly, they didn't really look impressive, but if they're able to keep their game clean moving forward, maybe they'll be able to develop more and turn into a more established team. This is honestly one of the harder picks, which is weird because I would think this would be a clear-cut Bears win, but Panthers looking good the past couple weeks has me really questioning if I should be picking the Bears here. I'm gonna trust the Bears defense, and I'm gonna trust that Caleb has looked like he's been cleaning up his game. He hasn't really looked impressive, but he's been cleaning up his game, looking better. So I'm gonna go ahead and take the Bears to beat the Panthers. Up next, we've got the Cleveland Browns versus the Washington Commanders. The Cleveland Browns coming off a loss against the Las Vegas Raiders, in which the Cleveland Browns really didn't do anything well in the game. And then they're taking on the Washington Commanders, who honestly look like a really good team. Like, I thought they were probably on the same level as the Cardinals, but they really crushed the Cardinals this past week. They again have Jaden Daniels playing really well, going 26 of 30 for over 200 yards and a touchdown. So I really would like to see just how good this offense is. The Browns, they aren't the defense that they were last year, but they still are a pretty solid defense. I want to see Washington do well in this game against the Browns defense, and I'm going to be picking the Washington Commanders to beat the Browns. Next, we got the Miami Dolphins taking on the New England Patriots. The Miami Dolphins had an ugly loss against the Titans, and they really don't look good without Tua. I think this really just says that they are dying to get Tua back. And the New England Patriots had a bad loss, but it was against the 49ers. You really expect that game to go that way. However, when it comes to the Dolphins versus the Patriots, I just think the Patriots are going to be able to establish a run game, and they're going to be able to just win time of possession and probably win a more lower scoring game. Up next, we got the Indianapolis Colts taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. I know in the Colts-Steelers game, Anthony Richardson did get hurt. I'm not sure if he'll be playing, but when Joe Flacco came in, he did well. So honestly, I think either way, the Colts should be fine in this matchup, as they did beat the, daunting Steelers defense and putting up 27 points on them when the Steelers had only let up 26 points in the first 3 weeks. As for the Jacksonville Jaguars, they lost a close game against the Texans, in which the Texans scored a pretty much last-second touchdown to win the game. Jaguars didn't really look impressive, though. I think more so it was the Texans just not looking like the Texans of last year. As far as the Colts versus the Jaguars, I will be taking the Indianapolis Colts, whether they have Anthony Richardson or Joe Flacco. I think they'll be able to beat the Jaguars. This next game should be an interesting one. We've got the Buffalo Bills taking on the Houston Texans, in which the Texans are 3-1, but they haven't really had really good wins. And they've struggled in some of those wins and even getting blown out by the Vikings. Whereas the Bills, they looked like a really good team for the first 3 weeks, and then they just got obliterated by the Ravens last week. So this really, to me, is a game of determining which of these teams is actually a good team this year. As far as that's concerned, I think I'm going to lean towards the Bills to beat the Texans in this matchup. Then we have what should be another good game in the Baltimore Ravens taking on the Cincinnati Bengals. Baltimore Ravens coming off an impressive win against the Bills in which Derrick Henry almost ran for 200 yards. They finally seem to have learned what they should have been doing ever since the beginning of the season. As far as the Cincinnati Bengals, they beat the Panthers, which, although the Panthers are looking better, they're still not a good team. At least I don't think so. So I really don't know how much I should be weighing that win, but the Ravens beat what I thought was a good team in the Bills. So I think as far as impressive wins, I'm going to have to give it to the Ravens. And so I think they're going to win against the Bengals. Up next, we have the Las Vegas Raiders versus the Denver Broncos. Both of these teams have had good wins against good teams, with the Raiders beating the Ravens and the Broncos beating the Jets. And now it comes down to a AFC West matchup between two 2-2 teams, in which I think the Broncos defense is the difference maker in this game. And so I will be taking the Denver Broncos to beat the Raiders in Denver. Up next, we have the Arizona Cardinals versus the San Francisco 49ers. The Cardinals coming off a real bad loss against the Washington Commanders, in which they were only able to put up 14 points, which their offense has looked good throughout the rest of the season, so I don't know what their struggle was against a seemingly bad Commanders defense. As for the 49ers, they beat up on the Patriots like they were supposed to. Nothing of note really for that game, other than Brock Purdy is continuing to look fairly good without his weapons. As far as the matchup, if the Cardinals had won this past week, I think I might have flirted with the idea of them upsetting the 49ers here. But I just think the 49ers are just a better, well-round built roster. And I think their coaching just has the advantage. And they come away with the win over the Cardinals. Up next, we have the New York Giants taking on the Seattle Seahawks. The Giants coming off a close loss against the Dallas Cowboys, in which the Cowboys really should have won that game by more. So props to the Giants for at least sticking into it and keeping it a one-possession game for the whole game. I mean, really, they had a chance to win it at the end, but they just weren't able to make the plays necessary. As far as the Seattle Seahawks, they actually had a fairly good offensive performance against the Lions, but their defense just wasn't able to stop the Lions at all. I mean, Jared Goff didn't even have an incompletion throughout the whole game. So, as far as what my thoughts were on the Seattle defense, I thought they were really good this year, but after that, I'm really not sure. However, I still just think Seattle is the better team here, and I would take Geno Smith and the weapons that he has over Daniel Jones and pretty much his sole performing wide receiver in Malik Neighbors. So I'm going to take the Seattle Seahawks to beat the New York Giants. Up next, we've got the Green Bay Packers versus the LA Rams. The Green Bay Packers coming off a close loss against the Vikings, in which they were down 28-0, but actually brought it back and only lost by 2 points. So really, they did show resolve in the fact that they started off very slow, had a lot of turnovers early, but really brought that game back at the end. Then, as far as the LA Rams, they lost to the Bears in a one-possession game, which really, that game was determined by a turnover battle, with the Rams losing a fumble as well as Stafford throwing an interception. That really solidified that this game was going to go to the Bears. As far as the Packers versus the Rams, I had higher hopes for the Rams at this point in the season, and they really haven't lived up to that. So the Packers, honestly, even though they've lost both their games with Jordan Love, they were against better opponents. And so I give them a little bit more slack there, especially with Jordan Love coming off injury. And I really do think that Jordan Love and the Packers will end up beating the LA Rams. Up next, we have the Dallas Cowboys taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Dallas Cowboys coming off a very narrow win against the Giants, which they really should have dominated, so that does give cause for concern, especially with Micah Parsons possibly being out for a few weeks, as well as DeMarcus Lawrence being out for a few weeks. Then the Steelers ended up losing to the Colts, but they had a good offensive performance with Justin Fields throwing over 300 yards and a touchdown. However, when Joe Flacco came into that game, I think the Steelers just weren't prepared and didn't plan for him, and so he ended up playing efficient ball, throwing for 2 touchdowns and winning the Colts the game. With DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons also probably being out, I really just don't see how I pick the Cowboys here, because I just think the Steelers' defense will do what they need to do, locking them down, because the Cowboys can't run the ball at all. So I feel like the Steelers' defense will win them this game, and Justin Fields will just have to play a clean game in order to get them the win. So I'm taking the Pittsburgh Steelers to beat the Dallas Cowboys. Then we have our final game of the week, the Monday night matchup of the New Orleans Saints taking on the Kansas City Chiefs. The Saints ended up losing a close, heartbreaking game against the Falcons, in which the Falcons drove down and got a game-winning field goal in the last seconds. As far as the Chiefs, they ended up winning against the Chargers, but did lose Rashid Rice for probably a significant amount of time at least, if not the whole season. So I really think, even with that injury, the Chiefs are just probably the best coach team in the league. And I just think they're going to find a way to win like they have for the first 4 weeks. And so I'm going to take the Chiefs to end 5-0 after week 5. And that's it for my NFL week 5 predictions. Let me know what you think will happen in the comments below. Other than that, I would really appreciate if you would like and subscribe so you can see more. And I'll see you guys in the next video.